Hello everyone, Max here with Fiction Rant to bring you part 5 of my Empire vs. Goa'uld matchup. That is the Galactic Empire from Star Wars. Thanks comment section for pointing out that I was technically misnaming it this whole time by calling it the Imperial Empire. It is the Galactic Empire. That is just prior to the Battle of Endor versus the Goa'uld from Stargate just prior to the defeat of Ra, though they'll still get access to all their tech. This section will cover the numbers available to each side. Also, I have a coffee link in the description if you want to support the channel, and I should have some merch available soon, so stay tuned for that. Before we get started though, I want to point out something I managed to skip over in my defenses section, as well as correct some of my math from the speed section. In short, the Empire uses planetary shields to help defend their worlds. They're powerful but not indestructible, and the Goa'uld don't seem to use anything equivalent to that. As for the math, TIE fighters are actually about 10 times faster than I stated, at least in space. Basically, I just converted g to meters per second 1-to-1 instead of multiplying by 9.8, since 1g is supposed to equal 9.8 meters per second squared. Oops! In any case, this speed is still for just in space, so it's ultimately totally meaningless, but yeah, instead of 73,800 kph, the speed cap should be more like 723,000 kph. Again, this is just in space. Atmospheric speeds are totally unaffected, and in space you should really be able to go as fast as you want before relativity levels, since there's no air, so yeah. I gotta mention the mistake anyway, but it shouldn't make any difference. Alright, on to the comparison here. It's important when doing any of these matchups to not only consider gross numbers of total forces on each side, but also how many can actually realistically be deployed in any given engagement. So like if you have 1 billion soldiers, but you can only realistically field 1,000 of them at a time, you're not going to be able to take advantage of those huge numbers, though you will have a ton of reserves to call upon. Your effective numbers at any given time are 1,000, nowhere close to 1 billion. All that to say, I don't care nearly as much about how many ships or soldiers exist on each side. I care about how many have actually been deployed in a single engagement at the same time, as this better reflects the logistical capabilities and operational burden on each side. The Empire, for example, has a lot of its fleet tied up at any given time just maintaining order because they rule through terror. Speaking of the Empire, I'll start with them, and I'll start on the ground. Unfortunately, we don't really have a good example of them fighting a ground battle in earnest versus an equivalent enemy. The biggest engagement we see on the ground is from the original trilogy, and that was the Battle of Hoth. And it's hard for me to consider that a full-on maximum effort, since that fight really wasn't actually much of a fight for the Empire. It was pretty much pest control. The rebels never stood a chance there, and everyone knew it. The name of the game was get in, smash the steel generator, and then let the Star Destroyers in orbit just blow up everything through orbital bombardment. Everything else was gravy. So what else can we use? Well, technically it's from the Republic days, but it was indicative of the resources the Empire could dedicate to a fight, since this really was the moment that the Empire started to be born, and that is the Battle of Geonosis. During this battle, 192,000 clones were deployed, and they were supported by clone commandos, various dropships, walkers, speeders, and artillery. Now that's a full-scale battle, and I have no problem saying that the Empire could match or even exceed this level of commitment. On the Stargate side, we run into a problem. Basically, I have no idea how many troops could be involved in any particular battle, since we never see them going against anything on that kind of scale. This is probably due to the combination of factors. For one, most times we see Jaffa engaged in combat, it's with one of the SG teams, which consist of just a handful of people, so sending thousands and thousands of troops against them would not only be a waste, but they'd probably actually get in each other's way. Plus, at any given time, you wouldn't see that many troops actually engaging. There just isn't space for that. Also, each Hatak vessel only carries around 2,000 troops in addition to their operational crew, which can be as small as 1 to 12 people. For contrast, an Imperial II Star Destroyer carries a complement of 37,085 just for crew, with an additional garrison of 9,700 stormtroopers, plus armored vehicles, AT-ATs, that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think it's pretty safe to say that the Goa'uld are capable of fielding far larger ground forces than we get to see in the shows, but even those larger forces would be totally dwarfed by what the Empire can deploy. Moving up into space, the largest fleet we ever get to see the Empire deploy was at the Battle of Endor, but this runs into an issue that assembling that particular fleet had to be done in secret, so none of the rebel spies or whatever would catch on to what was actually going on. So, yeah, that was actually a pretty underpowered fleet compared to what the Empire can actually do. So instead, I will talk about the Battle of Coruscant from the end of the Clone Wars, because I think it much better represents a real concerted effort, much like the Battle of Geonosis. Backing up a little bit, the Empire in total has millions of ships, but this is somewhat misleading since every TIE fighter and transport counts toward that total. For numbers that actually matter, it's more helpful to look at Star Destroyers, and unfortunately we only have limited information here. What we do have is that the Empire had 25,000 Imperial-class Star Destroyers, including Imperial 1, 2, and Interdictor classes, at the height of its power. So any additional classes, Executor, Super Star Destroyers, all that kind of stuff, those would be added on top of that number. I've seen estimates from fans that they actually had billions of Star Destroyers, but I don't think there's any chance of that being true or even close to being true. Just look at the amount of power a single Star Destroyer brings to any fight. They're designed to basically be able to single-handedly oppress entire planets, far more than any single rebel ship can bring to bear. Well, if the Empire had billions or even just millions of Star Destroyers, they'd be quite capable of sticking one or two at every single inhabited world in the entire Empire that actually has some kind of industrial capability producing ships, and just totally eliminate the rebels' ability to arm themselves. Demonstrably, they can't have that many ships. Not to mention the fact that even the 25,000 number comes from the Imperial sourcebook published in 1989, long before the prequels, and thus very firmly in Legends. And specifically from the era when the Clone Wars looked completely different from when the prequel trilogy came out. And I don't even think they'd actually named Palpatine Darth Sidious at the time. All that to say, I'm going to use the 25,000 number because I don't have anything better to go off of, but take it with a massive grain of salt because even George Lucas retconned the source of that number. Alright, back to the Battle of Coruscant. How many ships were there in total? I'm not finding. But what I do have is that it included over 1,000 Venator-class Star Destroyers, which were the heavy hitters of the Republic at the time, along with a bunch of other, different classes of ships. So for the sake of argument, let's call it 1,500 ships. But in the case of the Empire, we'd of course modernize the fleet up from Venators to the Imperial series and probably inflate the numbers a little bit. I think 1,500 is a decent ballpark. So now let's pivot and look at the Goa'uld. This will be significantly more straightforward. In short, we have no idea how many the Goa'uld actually have in total across all of the system lords, particularly because they just don't combine forces much. So each system lord has their own fleet, and there's multiple system lords, and we really don't get to see them actually combining forces much, and all of them are not created equal. What we do have is information on the most ships deployed in a single battle, that being the Battle of Dakara between the Free Jaffa movement, Baal's fleet, and the Replicator fleet, to which Baal brought a whopping 40 ships. And the implication here was that this was actually a pretty significant commitment of ships from the Goa'uld of any kind. So yeah, numbers in all theaters of war pretty heavily favor the Empire. I know that you're all going to be totally shocked by this, but it's really important to actually quantify this stuff. If the Goa'uld were numbered about 2-1, it wouldn't be probably too much of a stomp in terms of numbers. I mean, the rest of the factors will of course matter. Outnumbered over 10-1 though, that's pretty rough odds. And with that, I'll wrap this up. Let me know what you think in the comments, especially let me know if I missed or misrepresented anything. Again, I'll have merch on the way pretty soon, and I have a coffee link in the description if you want to support the channel. And until next time, live long and prosper, and may the Force be with you.